It's the Fitness Lab Pittsburgh podcast, a new episode every week. A podcast about movement, part of making your life complete. Fitness Lab Pittsburgh, aka FitLab PGH, brings you interviews with people in the Pittsburgh area who understand movement is part of what makes life complete. Looking for a new movement idea or just want to hear interesting stories about people who make movement a priority? This is the podcast for you. Whether you consider the gym, dojo, or fitness studio your third place, or just want to learn more about movement, activity, and fitness to enhance your life, give FitLab PGH a listen. We interview locals in the Pittsburgh area who make Pittsburgh a great place to move. Subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Google Play, or check out our website for other subscription options. Subscribing is free and gives you notifications when we release new episodes. Each podcast episode will be long enough to pique your interest and short enough to hold your attention. Have an idea for an episode? Know somebody we should interview? Or just want to connect with us? Drop us an email, fitlabpgh@gmail.com, or follow us on Twitter or Instagram at fitlabpgh. Already a fan of FitLab PGH? Check out our sister podcast, Moving to Live. Moving to Live is a podcast for movement professionals and amateur aficionados. Moving to Live offers weekly interviews with movement professionals featuring topics from career development to coaching tips and education resources to advice for parents of student athletes. We look forward to hearing from you, and we hope you enjoy our next interview, starting now. FitLab PGH and our sister podcast, Moving to Live, firmly believe that movement should be treated as a lifestyle, not just an activity. That's why FitLab PGH, in addition to our weekly podcast releases, also do a 1-minute movement tip lifestyle hack video that we release every Monday, Wednesday, Friday on most social media channels, including YouTube and Instagram. We also release a FitLab Pittsburgh Features every Thursday, which is a written feature of a 2-legged or 4-legged mover in the Pittsburgh area. If you want to be featured, go to our webpage, click on the FitLab Pittsburgh Features link, fill out the form, and be featured in an upcoming feature. Until then, enjoy our upcoming podcast coming now. FitLab PGH back with another podcast. We did not go through a tunnel today, but we did go over a bridge. I'm excited always to learn about new activities or things that I don't know anything about. I suspect the first time I heard about Muay Thai and really understood kind of what it was when we interviewed Chris Yanakos a few months back. And we looked around, and I think it was an article I saw that was either written up on Facebook or maybe there was a Post-Gazette article. And we found Michael Seamans. He is the owner, founder, all-around guy of SKN Muay Thai in Squirrel Hill. And he's going to tell us a little bit about his story, which just from chatting with him for a few minutes, I think is going to be interesting. And he's also going to tell us a little bit more about the sport or activity or martial art, I'm sure he'll correct me on what it is, of Muay Thai. So, Mike, thanks for taking time to talk to FitLab PGH.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Now that we're on the record, I apologize for changing the time that we were getting together a few times. As is the case of a new business, there's always some scramble of something that you didn't expect coming up in the course of a day or a week or an hour. It just is the way it goes. But yes, I'm actually, I would say I'm one of the owners of SKN Muay Thai or Sitkiatnin Muay Thai. There's 3 owners: myself, my wife, Marissa Barr-Hartman, and our partner and head trainer, David Reese. So, I tend to be the media persona, and I'm the one owner who's not also a head trainer. So I can do the talking, I'll let them do the training, and everyone plays to their strengths.
And I think that's called delegating.
Yes, exactly.
So before we find out more about the sport and more about your facility, find out a little bit about yourself. Are you a Pittsburgh native? If so, why are you still here? If not, what brought you here?
I am a Pittsburgh native. Technically, I grew up in Wilkinsburg, which is not the city of Pittsburgh, but as everybody likes to, expand the borders of Pittsburgh, I consider myself a Pittsburgh native. Grew up in Wilkinsburg, and then eventually we moved into Point Breeze when I was a teenager. I've tried to leave Pittsburgh actually multiple times. I always thought as a teenager that I wanted to get out of here and go somewhere big and exciting, and managed to move to New York City briefly. When Marissa and I met, she was going to graduate school and moved to Washington, D.C. briefly. And it's sort of the magnetic place that keeps drawing you back in. And I genuinely love Pittsburgh. I think that, growing up, I thought that there was greener pastures in a bigger city or something that was more exciting. And I've really, at a pretty young age, realized that there was just a tremendous amount of opportunity in Pittsburgh, and being able to start businesses, or I was able to buy a house at a very young age. And it's the ultimate town city is the way I describe it. It's, it sort of has a large footprint, but then it has the feeling of a small town. And there's towns within the towns, depending on your neighborhood or whatever.
And I'm curious about this. We were chatting before recording, and you said your dad and I think your mom were documentary filmmakers. Do you think having the opportunity to travel around with them and experience life with them kind of planted the idea, boy, there's all these neat places? And then as you grew older and realized things that were more important or things that you valued, it's like, oh, I can get those in Pittsburgh.
Absolutely. I started traveling at a very young age. I took my first step. I think we were in Italy. And at just a young age, flying on airplanes, riding on boats, driving all around, my sense of the vastness of the world came early. And what I have discovered since then is, rather than I'm going to find this place that I'm going to move to and escape Pittsburgh, is it's a tremendous place to live in and travel from. So we travel, my wife and I, constantly. We go to Thailand a lot for Muay Thai. We take road trips to other cities. We'll just look and see, we're on all the different cheap flight email lists to see where you could go for a few days, and just getting out of town and expanding your horizons is something I think is incredibly valuable. But Pittsburgh is a fantastic home base. And my parents, as I mentioned, both documentary filmmakers. They're from Boston. I was born here. They came here to work for WQED, the TV station on Fifth Avenue. My dad was a cameraman and then producer for National Geographic that used to make all of their broadcast specials out of the Pittsburgh TV station here before they started the cable channel. My mom was Mrs. McFeely on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and then went on to she mainly actually will tell you she was a writer for Mr. Rogers. She wrote a lot of the episodes in that sort of 70s, 80s era, and then was acting to sort of supplement that. That's the way that the whole program worked. No one was just one thing. She then also began making documentary and educational films for Mr. Rogers. And since the show ended, she went full on documentary filmmaker, and now has been working on, long form documentaries for the last several years.
And I've never asked this question on FitLab Pittsburgh, but since you told that story, I have to ask it. How weird was it growing up watching Mr. Rogers and a character would be on there? And would you identify it as her as mom, or would you identify her as the character?
My dad tells the stories pretty frequently that I had a hard time as a child distinguishing between reality and fiction, because I would see something like, I remember I saw Children of the Corn on TV and I was terrified. And he was trying to explain to me, it's not real, it's not real, it's not real. And then, Mr. Rogers would then show up at our house, and I would say well, how is this not real? And I will say, growing up on Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, not only just geographically, where we are right now is very close to where he lived, but then going to the show set all the time. And I would walk in and he would let me sit in his office. He would talk to me. I have very few things that I will get territorially aggressive about, but anyone who has anything bad to say about Mr. Rogers, I take great offense to, because he truly was a wonderful person. Actually, I had a sister who passed away when I was a teenager. And one of the first people who came to our house after finding out what had happened and leaving the hospital was Mr. Rogers. And I was 17 years old. Everyone was telling me, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And the first person who came in the house and told me everything's going to be okay, and I truly believed it, was Fred Rogers. And his presence and his calmness was something that was just amazing and very real. It was not an act. He was not fake. It just was a truly sincere person.
And that probably contributes to why there's so many fond memories of many people of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood of the show. Because they recognize this is genuine versus this is to make some money or to make a name for myself. And now I can go back and be a jerk in real life.
Absolutely.
So I'm always curious with people that we interview for FitLab Pittsburgh, clearly with all the travel and parents as documentary filmmakers, some of the places you went, there wasn't the public transportation, et cetera. But were you an active kid growing up? And I always want to ask when I ask that question, were mom and dad active, or was it get the heck out of the house, Mike, and don't come back until it's dinner time?
So I had a very conflicted relationship with exercise and fitness as a child. I loved playing baseball when I was, in second, third, fourth grade. And I was like, I've always been tall. I mean, I'm 6'4", and I swear, and I know this can't actually be true, that by the time I was in second grade, I was like over 5 foot. And playing baseball, just the leverage that worked in my favor. I was a big hitter. I could just home runs. And as soon as I got bumped up into being, I can't remember what league I got bumped up to. I played 14th Ward baseball in the East End of Pittsburgh. And then the kids, I was then like average sized, and the kids, I was the youngest, and the kids played a little meaner. And I remember kids like intentionally trying to hit you with pitches and stuff. And I was like, this is not for me. My parents were somewhat active. We were outdoor. We liked to camp. We liked to go hiking. No one was really into sports. It's not like we didn't play. Like the idea of, when I liked playing baseball, to get my dad to put on a baseball glove and play catch in the backyard was like not a natural thing for him. We didn't go to sporting events. But the idea of being outdoors was something that was really important. And then after I fell out with baseball, part of a sort of rebellion was rebelling against the idea of wanting to be active. Like I didn't like I wanted to just like hang outside and watch TV. A big part of my background is in music and sort of underground music. And then 4th, 5th grade is when I started to find it. And then I got really, at a young, I started smoking when I was like 11.
I can beat you. I tried smoking when I was 6 years old. We stole my mom's cigarettes, and it lasted about 6 months till we got caught.
So actually my first, not to one up you, my first actual cigarette, I was 5 years old. And I guess that, we don't have kids, but I have nieces, and I spend time around friends of mine's kids. As a child, you think you're being really sly, but that you're not. And I guess that I was really interested by the idea of smoking. And so someone finally, I will spare them the embarrassment on this podcast, but a person in an authoritative role in my life thought, let's just break you of this fascination. I'm going to give you a cigarette. And I was sort of puffing on it. And then I guess I wasn't inhaling it. And they said, well, no, you really got to inhale it if you're going to smoke. This is how you smoke. And I inhaled the cigarette and I passed out because just like all the nicotine. And I think they thought that that was going to be it. And they were wrong. It took a while, but before too long, I was like, that was pretty cool. That was really, and when I started getting in, I can't blame music. Music has given me so much in my life, but I was really into the idea of being cool. And, and this is late 80s, early 90s. Cool people still smoked. And, I started gravitating towards, smoking cigarettes. Still, interestingly, skateboarding. I skateboarded for years. But I was not I was like anti-sports. And I went to Shady Side Academy for, pretty much I first went to Carlo and then I went to Shady Side. I did leave for a little bit, but basically from 3rd grade till, the end of high school, I went to Shady Side, which is a very athletically focused school. And it was not for me. And so I rebelled against that a lot. And I sort of liked the idea of I really liked the idea of being sort of one of the bad kids. I wasn't bad behaviorally. I wasn't, I never got detention once in high school. But but I like identified as like wanting to be this like almost, you know, Fast Time at Ridgemont High caricature bad kid. And I was really into art. Photography, as I was pointing out photographs around here. And I like bought into almost an identity of being, is like very much an identity that was, defined by like I was not this, I was not this, I was not this. So at a certain point in life, you realize like, well, what is the substance of what it is that you're into if everything is defined by what you're not? But what happened is there was a movement it came to Pittsburgh in the late 90s. I don't know when it started in the Bay Area. That was called Critical Mass, which was there's
a trend.
Yes. Motor vehicle, pro bike, informal, frequent protest. People who I was, sort of looked up to and people who were into music with me, they organized the first Critical Mass in Pittsburgh, which I recall was October of 1998, if my memory is correct. And suddenly I was like, oh, bikes are cool. And so I went in the garage and I like dug out this old mountain bike that I'd had from when I was in like 7th grade and showed up to go to Critical Mass, and everyone was like, yeah, this is like riding a bike is cool. And so it fit because it was like, okay, so I can still like smoke cigarettes, drink, whatever. But then like these other folks are into like riding bikes, but it's not like exercise. It's not like jockey. It's like social. And that started my first love of exercise, being riding bikes. And from about 16 years old until 25, bikes were very central to my identity. I didn't drive a car until I was 30. In the city of Pittsburgh, that's a feat to do that. So that's really like the beginning of my life in sports and with athletics.
And I think what's really interesting is you mentioned skateboarding and being involved in art. We interviewed, and I'm going to not remember his last name, but Kerry of Switch and Signal Skatepark about over a year ago. And he made the same thing, how he was into music and skateboarding and art. So I think it's interesting. Something that I didn't realize before I started interviewing people for FitLab Pittsburgh is there is that trend or path of people who are into skateboarding are often very artistic or appreciate art and music also.
Oh, absolutely. And it's like, it's a whole culture. It's not a standalone thing. And that's one of the things which is amazing about skateboarding is that, there's graphics on the decks and, then there's a social element to it. And then there's a musical, component to it. And it's this big culture. It's not a standalone thing. And, I was never good at skateboarding. I loved it. I loved the culture of it. I loved the social aspect of it. But then also, picking up skateboarding when you're growing vertically at a really rapid rate, and this thing that is like especially good if you have a low center of gravity, it didn't work well for me.
Leverage does not work well when you're 6'4" on a skateboard. It's very easy to wipe out and dump it.
And I have friends who are amazing. They're great skaters that are super tall. I just think maybe they're better coordinated than I am, or maybe it just like, I remember, going through these growth spurts and having this awkward body and then trying to find, my center of balance, and it was just not working.
Interesting path. I'm curious, how did you find, and I'll probably butcher the pronunciation, Muay Thai?
The easiest version of the story involves Marissa, my wife, which, we both, I had a record store that was called Mind Cure Records, and it was a record store, a record label, and I was trying to build this musical community, and I was running myself into the ground. Her older brother's a boxing trainer, and proposed the idea of going out to his gym. And his gym, he was the lead boxing instructor in a gym near North Versailles. And, Marissa, she, as a young child, did, various forms of, karate, Tang Soo Do, in college, then started to pick up jujitsu. And she was like, I think you would really like boxing. And it seemed unintimidating because it was family. It wasn't walking into this gym blindly. And we went a few times and I really liked it, but then I very quickly fell off with driving out there from, home and work. So she kept going for, a good year and a half. And finally she said, what do you think about trying Muay Thai? And she had found that who our now partner was running a Muay Thai program out of a gym in the Strip District called Stout Training, which is like it's a jiu-jitsu gym, martial arts gym, MMA gym. And I was like, all right, it's close to our house. Like, I'll give it a shot. And the first time we went, I was like, this is crazy. Because I thought I understood what it was.
And for listeners who don't understand, as a business owner now, and somebody says, what is this activity or sport or martial art? How do you define it?
So the easiest way to define it is most people quickly associate it with kickboxing in that it is upright combat sports. There's not grappling on the ground. It's not MMA where there's upright and ground. It is an upright striking sport, where the legal, maneuvers are punches, kicks, but then also knees, elbows, and then a form of upright stand-up grappling that's called clinching. And there are shades of how the sport is competed. Is that the right word? Competed? Where, in some versions in the United States, which is, in its truest form in Thailand, there's one way to do this sport. There's no alternate rule set. There's, kids start training when they're 2, 3, 4. They'll be around a gym and just like picking it up a little bit. A dad or uncle will put their hands up and they'll start learning basic movements. And then they'll actually start fighting when they're 8, 9, 10.
And in Thailand, is it for both genders, males and females?
Increasingly, yes. For a long time, it was just for males. But there's now more and more young female fighters. There's not a kids version of the sport. And this is the source of a lot of controversy, which is a whole other conversation to have. But at its baseline, we will leave it at no one is going to tell you that children who have to fight for money is a good version of the world. So we need to accept that there's a massive global inequality, which involves the fact that kids have to fight for money.
And they become professionals at 8 or 9.
Because there's no such thing as an amateur fight in Thailand. I mean, everyone's getting paid. It is, 8 years old, you're fighting for money. So we went to the gym and I was like hooked. I was like, and I mean, you see it in people where people either like really connect with it or they don't. And, unfortunately, and I'm sort of going to give you a streamlined version of this, as I got more and more into it, I realized that actually I had some physical limitations. So one of the things which I actually would love to use this platform to tell people is I have a genetic condition that's called hemochromatosis, which is, excess iron. It's a genetic deformity. I was lucky to find out that I have it before anything bad happened. I believe now they give most newborn children a genetic panel. It's pretty common to have the gene deformity. It's less common to have it actually cause you any problems. The only way to treat it is they just remove whole blood out of my body. Anybody who's like over the age of, I would say 18, if you've never had a hemochromatosis test, it's worth getting it done, just because if you find out now, you can spare yourself most of the, problems that come with it. As I started training, knowing I already had hemochromatosis, there were some odd things that came up from suddenly putting my full body through these rigorous workouts. And I discovered that I have a misformed hip, which explained why I was having a hard time picking up certain maneuvers. From having that misformed hip and doing some other movements, I then had a rotator cuff, not full on injury in that something happened, but like a series of sort of, these chain, I don't know what the right way to put it, but like there was a sequence of small injuries that happened that compounded each other.
And morphologically, just the way you're made, you figured this is not going to be something where I'm going to be an elite athlete or progress to a very high level.
Absolutely. Also, I just realized, like, I started watching people who this was what they started doing when they were, let alone 3 people who picked it up when they were 16. And I was like, it's going to be really hard to catch up to this. But in having the gym, I tell people this all the time. I still get great enjoyment and fulfillment out of doing it, knowing that I'm never going to be like elite level at it. And there's a lot to be gained from it, from, just enjoying being present in the activity.
And in FitLab Pittsburgh, we always say movement is a lifestyle, not an activity. And it sounds somehow you've realized this at some level. Look, I may never be the best fighter in my gym or the best sparring partner, but I enjoy doing it. So I suspect if we're around in another 40 years and we come back, you'll probably still be doing it or something along those lines, because you've realized, hey, I enjoy this at a higher level other than saying this is a competition.
Absolutely. So what's interesting about all of this, I had to step away from doing it for a solid 12 months. We were in Thailand, where Marissa and I and David as well, go at least twice a year and train at, there's mainly 2 gyms we go to in Thailand. And I was there, and this trainer who I was working with, he was looking at me, and he didn't speak very much English, but through someone who spoke decent Thai in his like okay English, he was the person who actually first diagnosed the fact that there was something wrong with my hip. Because the Muay Thai kick takes a lot of practice to figure out. It's not like a karate kick. It's not like any other kind of kick. And someone once said that, Muay Thai is about torque, where other martial arts are about momentum, or I can't remember how they put it, but torque is the important part, which is you're trying to really rotate your body in a way that other martial arts or striking arts are not. And he realized that I could, on my less dominant side, I understood what I was supposed to do and could do it. But on the leg that it should be more natural, I was having a hell of a time getting it done. And so they're like, go home and go to a doctor. And that's how I discovered of the hip, and that from the hip that I had some damage to the labral tissue inside my hip. And I had a fantastic doctor, a guy named Dr. Craig Mauro, who I guess does a lot of sports medicine out of the hospital that's in Aspinwall. And he said, if you were 18 and this was this bad, I would tell you to get surgery. Because if this got this bad at 18, by the time you're 30, this is going to be really bad. So if you were 70, I would tell you to get surgery, because it might save you from ever having to get a hip replacement. But at the time I was 35, and he was like, at 35, if it's only this bad, I'd sort of be curious to see what happens if we try some other stuff before putting you through surgery, which best case scenario will make your life much better. But worst case scenario, it could just stay the same, or could even potentially not get back to where it is now. And he was really candid about that.
And very unusual for some orthopedic surgeons to say, yeah, I don't want to operate on you.
Well, I came to him through somebody who maybe would be a great person to talk to on your podcast, which is a physical therapist named Nancy Foley, who has a business called Foley Fit, or it's, what is the name of it? Foley Physical. I can't remember. It's on Penn Avenue by Lang Street. And
Google is our friend. We'll probably hunt her down.
You should. And she's, amazing. Just like her sense of care and detail, and just like listening to helping someone go through physical therapy is amazing. And I came to her through my mom, who she had a small injury that Nancy helped her overcome. And then my parents they'll hate me for saying this, into their 70s. And she works with them consistently, almost like a, personal trainer / physical therapist, to help them stay ahead of various, just ways that the body will break down, or, strengthening muscles that you lose as you get older, and is just a phenomenal person who I can't say enough good things about.
Along the same lines, I go to Dr. Pete Thomas, who's a chiropractor and athletic trainer, every 3 or 4 weeks, because I've got some disc problems, just to pick up exercise ideas and tips. So when you find somebody like that, it really doesn't matter what their certification or accreditation is. It's their ability to look at you and say, why don't you try moving this way, or why don't you try these exercises? And over the long term, it can have a tremendous benefit on anybody's life, whether they're an athlete or whether they're somebody who just wants to be able to walk to the grocery store.
Absolutely. And Nancy, she has a business partner named Beth Fedorowich, who is a personal trainer who's been in Pittsburgh for, she's from the area, but she's been a personal trainer in Pittsburgh since the 80s, and they're both amazing. And I've worked with both of them, through figuring out my hip, through re-strengthening my shoulder. And they're great and really, they just really care about the people they work with and making sure that what they're doing is best for them, not what's best for, they don't have a system that they've invented that they're certain is going to work for everybody. They're not trying to publish a book or an article or anything. Like, they're just about working with the people that are right there with them. And what's interesting about that to me is, again, fitness is something that in the big scheme of things I'm new to. I've had a few personal trainers. I've worked with a few different trainers. And I have nothing bad to say about any of them. But when I worked with someone who's been doing fitness or been working with people like this for 30 something years, I realized, like, you really have a vast personal knowledge of what does and doesn't work and how to work with people individually. Not just anecdotal knowledge, not things that other people have told you, but you've seen how someone can recuperate or seen how someone gets stronger using your own, methods.
And very often when you find somebody like that, they're not well known in the big picture, because I'll butcher the quote, so I won't say where I heard it from, but I heard it somewhere. Some of the people doing the best things you never hear about because they don't worry about their social media presence. They worry about helping their clients, patients, customers. And it's one of those things that once you find out who they are, you kind of file it away on your Rolodex. And then when somebody else, one of your friends, has a problem, you say, hey, Mike, check out this person. They might be able to help you.
Absolutely. And I think that that's a really great way of framing it.
And I'll give a shout out to another FitLab Pittsburgh podcast guest, Larry Joya. Larry has a theory called ABCD, always be connecting the dots. It's not who you know, it's who you know who knows somebody. And it sounds like you've discovered that without really connecting with Larry yet.
Well, it's funny because everyone, especially, at our gym in Squirrel Hill, very near where I grew up, and I spent a lot of time throughout my first apartment was across the street from here. And I'll stand outside and people are like, everybody. Like, people walk down the street. And it's like, I might know them to say hi to them, or it might be someone who is a very close friend. But the bigger thing is and one of the things I love about Pittsburgh is building and maintaining relationships with people that then, when you're trying to think of who would I call if I needed a physical therapist, you think of, that would be a really great person to ask, or this person would be a great person to ask. And that's invaluable. That's the greatest strength, I feel like, for myself, being in business, everything is just being able to do that.
And I think we'll have another interesting story here. You described how you found the activity or the sport of Muay Thai, but there's a big step from that to saying, I think I'm going to open a facility for this. And how did that come about?
So we were in Thailand. This was about 2.5 years ago with David Reese, who is our partner and the head trainer.
And I'm curious, just to interrupt with you there, as somebody who found the sport and whose wife does the sport, and you clearly have become good friends with the gentleman who's the trainer and partner with you. But very few people say, I'm going to go to Thailand to learn more about the sport. Or if they're a cyclist, I'm going to go to Italy and watch the Tour de Italia. How did you decide I want to go to Thailand and learn more about fighting, even though I know I'm not going to be an elite athlete? I'm going to be doing it for my enjoyment.
Well, that all comes from David, who was organizing a trip to take people to go and train at a gym. And as an aside, going to Thailand and training Muay Thai is something which has become more and more common. The American dollar will get you very far in Thailand. It is the birthplace of the sport and the place where it is practiced at its highest levels. And increasingly, with like the internet and the world becoming smaller, so to speak, there's gyms in Thailand who are realizing that they could make decent money training foreigners. So on one hand, there's like a upswing in gyms that cater to foreign people. A lot of the gyms that Thais would actually train at are really bare bones, stripped down, would be not either comfortable or even hospitable to foreign people. And so what David had was a connection. So he first went to Thailand in 1976. As a teenager, he was sent there by his uncle, who's Japanese, and he was into martial arts. And his uncle said, you should go, and send him there and set him up to train with people there. and was there on and off. He lived there for almost a decade at a chunk, but was there on and off from, the 70s until he came back to live in the United States in 2007. So he was able to put us into a gym that split the difference between somewhere that would be completely unwelcoming and also something that was sort of brand new and overly catering to delivering you an experience and a sort of like, resort-esque experience of Muay Thai. And when we were there for the first time, I was off the plane for 2 days, and I remember we went and got coffee, and I was saying to Marissa, we were going to be there for 2 weeks. And I said, like, we have to stay longer. Like, this isn't enough. We need to be here longer. And a lot of people have that experience, and it's a really magic place. And when you connect with the culture of Muay Thai, or even just you talk to people that go to Thailand to, learn. A friend of mine went there to learn how to cook, and he had a similar experience. It's like it's magnetic and it draws you in. And so after having been there with David twice, he was saying how he really wanted to start a gym. And I'd seen what a Muay Thai gym sort of was about rather than a gym that has a Muay Thai program. And I thought, wow, that's a really interesting idea. There are gyms in other cities in the United States that just do Muay Thai and are Muay Thai gyms. And I thought, I think that maybe this would work in Pittsburgh. And I have this like real, like self-taught, not in a good way necessarily, business background of learning how to, start a business, what you need to do. I mean, everything from how getting business utilities turned on to setting up a corporation. And Marissa is also a hairstylist. Her and her sister and another woman sort of run a salon as a co-op. And Marissa had started being one of David's trainers. And I thought, we sort of, again, delegating, playing to our strengths. They were like, I don't know how to run a business. I don't know how to run a Muay Thai gym, but I can figure out all the other end of it. And we talked about it for a while. David actually had another business partner that he was working with, that he was wanting to honor an agreement that they had. And eventually they both realized that they just weren't going to work very well together. And so in August of last year, we had come back from being in Thailand, and he said, I really want to do this gym. Let's do it. And I said, all right. And then it came together pretty rapidly from there. And, we talked about it a lot, but it wasn't really, sort of Dave would ask me hypothetical questions about business, or then I would have a question for him about like, well, how would you run this type of program? And it all just sort of started to mesh together once he decided that he wanted to move forward with us as his business partners. And there's so many things that you learn, like business 101. Don't get in business with a husband and a wife. Like that's just like, or spouses, but it works very well. And, I don't know, that's how we got here.
So what you're saying is you're not going to offer an entrepreneur class and say, these are the things to do, because maybe some of the things you do aren't what they teach in entrepreneur classes, but they work for you.
Yes. I would not say, I think that that's a good rule of thumb for everybody is like, don't think there's one method of recovery for an injury that's going to work for everybody, nor is there one method of running a business that's going to blanketedly be good for anyone else.
I remember my retinal surgeon said, here are the basic principles, but remember every patient is an N of one, so you may respond slightly differently. I think a lot of times in many things we forget about that.
Mm-hmm. One of the things, and to backtrack, to mess with the linearness of this interview, when I was finishing formal physical therapy, I was still in a lot of, I had a real lack of mobility. And in a sense, I think some of the strength that I was able to put around, if you think about having a misformed hip, my whole life I moved like slightly wrong. Not wrong enough that I had a limp, not wrong enough that I couldn't, ride a bike, but just slightly off in the way that I would stand maybe, and I'd cock my hip out in a certain way. That my physical therapist said, have you ever thought about trying yoga? And I had gone to 2 yoga classes and I hated them. And I thought it was like, I don't know, like it just seemed like not for me. And I was open to anything because I found the sport that I love doing and I wanted to do whatever it would take to get me to be able to compete or, to participate, maybe compete, but participate. And so I called a friend of mine who's a yoga instructor and I said, I need help. Would you work with me? And they said, I will, but I think you should work with my teacher. And so there's, and it feels like I was lucky to have made that connection in that phone call, because I was put into touch with a woman named Jennifer Butera, who's a Iyengar yoga instructor, who doesn't advertise, who doesn't have us open, a storefront, but teaches these classes out of her home. And I called her, and there's sort of the slight vetting process of, I'm going into her house. And I went, and the first time I worked with her, we hit it off really well. And I also realized that Iyengar yoga is perfect for me. And I don't know how much you're into yoga or what but it's like, it's really, it's precise, and it's really like, critical.
My understanding is it's one of those things that if your goal is to master something, it's not going to happen, because as soon as you think you're pretty good, the teacher is going to correct you and make you realize that, oh, well, I'm pretty good from where I started, but I've got a long way to go.
But it works for me. And so, when we were first working together, Jennifer and I, and she would say, like, I'm going to just be critical, but it's not personal. And I'm just like, no, give it to me. I'm into it. This works for me. And it's very meditative in that you have to be so present. You can't think about what is stressing you out, at the gym today, or, what happened with paying your taxes or whatever, because there's so many cues that you have to pay attention to. If you're not 100% in it, you can't even think that you're going to, fake your way through it.
We've interviewed a yoga instructor, Lynn Rosigno, and she has described something she calls Barbie yoga, which is what everybody wants to do, where you look cool. It sounds like, from what you're describing, you are not a Barbie yogi.
No, but I'm like amazed at how much I love it, though. Like, it is absolutely not that. And, it's this little community of people, and, maybe, I think a class can hold about 12 folks. You get to know everyone really well. I mean, and there's people who are, double my age. There's people that, you would think have, you're like, I don't know, like, you're into yoga, really? But like, it's people who look like they are really square, that work in an office downtown, but then they show up and they're like amazing at doing this. And that's one of the things I love about it. Same thing with Muay Thai, is that people show up and you're like, really, this is for you? And then they put on some shorts and some gloves and you're like, whoa, this is like, you're really this is your thing.
We're talking with Mike Seamans. He is one of the co-owners of SKN Muay Thai. For people who are not familiar with the activity, or they're not sure what it is, if they come to this facility here in Squirrel Hill, what typically happens? I mean, you've got a nice signboard out. They kind of walk in and they say, hey, what is this? I've heard about it. I heard the FitLab Pittsburgh podcast, maybe. What can I expect? I like to move, but I have never done anything like this.
So, you'll come from the street and you'll descend the stairs down into the gym.
And it's not a dungeon. It's very well lit. It's really cool pictures all around.
We try to keep it, very clean, very sanitary. No one likes a gym that doesn't feel like you don't want to touch anything. So, come down the stairs. It's well lit. It's clean. What we do for new students is, the best way to really get a sense of the program is we have people come in and do a sort of one-on-one, or maybe sometimes 2-on-1, depending on how many people are interested at a time, session with one of our trainers. And we usually do that session during a class, off to the side. We have the boxing ring, sometimes in the ring, so no one feels like they're sort of in the middle of everything. And when they work with either Marissa or David or Chris, they can get a sense of the language of, what do we say when we talk about throwing a two? What strike means what? And then also just to sort of get to be in the midst of the environment of one of the classes, if we can make it work. Sometimes it doesn't work that way. To just get a sense of sort of how we run the program. And I think it's a great way of easing people into it. And it's a great way of getting to know some of the people who run the program and some of the other people who are in the program. I mean, we really try to maintain an environment that's very friendly. So if you walk in the door, someone will say hi to you. If you look a little bit lost, usually me or someone will poke our head out and say, make sure that you're not just feeling like it can be intimidating to walk into a gym like this. And just to make sure that you don't feel like you're being left to left to the wolves or whatever, but that you're being welcomed in. And that once you work with a trainer for a session, So basically for $20, I'm not trying to give the sales pitch, but for $20, you can come in and work with a trainer. And then after that, come back and participate in a class. And if you enjoy it, then we'll take the $20 off of your first month's membership. And if you feel like it's not for you, I'd love to know if it's anything we did or if it's just an activity that you just don't know that you got time for. And then you really know what you're getting into before you sign up.
And I know way back at the beginning of FitLab Pittsburgh, we interviewed Wolfpack Boxing over in Carnegie, and he mentioned that some people come there and their goal is to start fighting. Some people just want to spar or they just want to take the classes. And I understand your facility is the same way. Just because it is traditionally a fighting art or sport doesn't mean that everybody who's coming into your facility wants to fight. Is that correct? That's correct.
And a Muay Thai gym is much more like a boxing gym than, say, like a karate studio. That's the environment is more about a competing sport rather than, I respect immensely martial arts that are more about self-discipline, mastering movement, but it is something that is about contact. And, we have classes that really, I say this and people think I'm sort of kidding, but we have classes that are designed for every skill level. And if you've never even thrown a punch, you've never even thought about it, we want to try to work you in, build up your skill. And then maybe you decide that you want to try sparring a little bit, or maybe you just say, I love doing pad work. It's a really great workout. And I feel like I feel like when I'm finished with a good workout, I feel happy. I feel, sort of an energy that's like, you don't get from anything else. And I want people to get that experience if that's what they want. Or if they decide that they want to fight. We have people that fight about once a month, different events around the tri-state area in Ohio and New York. And if you really want to do it, we will show you what it would take to get in the condition to do that. And what you have to put in order to safely participate, because we certainly don't want anyone competing that it wouldn't be, it would be unsafe to throw them into it.
And I'm curious because I know movement should be a lifetime activity no matter what you do. Youngest age for somebody to take this? And then my other question in the same realm is, what's the oldest person that you've had taking classes here, if you can remember?
So we have a program for kids that are as young as 6. We're working on, and part of this has to do with insurance, as so much of the world does, or at least the United States, a program that would sort of be for kids as young as 3 that would be more about, discipline, listening, some basic movement, but it would be a separate program, than the kids program, so to speak, which there's an entire movement for a youth development league in Muay Thai, which, not for one, there is one that even has kids competing in, very mediated circumstances in the sport. So, to be a participant in the full program, you have to be 15 years old or older with a parent's consent if you're under 18. Under 15, we have the kids/teens program where, we work on very foundational skills. And, the younger the kids, it's a little bit more about finding balance, finding, basic drills and stance and things like that. And then as they get older, more into training them to, participate into the full program.
And it sounds like many other activities that, as you've discovered yourself with your physical limitations, this is a lifetime sport. This isn't something that's like, well, I just have to stop.
Absolutely. And, I'd say that right now, the oldest person that we have at the gym is 62, I think. I don't think there's anyone older than that. But I've seen people participate in the sport that are, pushing 70.
We've been talking with Mike Seamans. He is one of the co-owners of SKN Muay Thai. Mike, thanks for taking time to talk to FitLab Pittsburgh.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for coming down.
Thanks for listening to the latest episode of FitLab PGH, brought to you by Moving to Live. Intro and exit music is Marathon Man by Jason Shaw. Check out the show notes for contact info for our latest guests, links to other information mentioned in the episode, and links to our sister podcast, Moving to Live. Moving to Live is a podcast about movement and exercise for professionals and amateur aficionados. Moving to Live offers topics from career development to coaching tips and education resources to advice for parents of student athletes. You can subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Google Play, or check out our website for other subscription options. Your free subscription gets you notified when we release a new episode. Questions, comments, suggestions? Email us at fitlabpgh@gmail.com or follow us on Twitter and Instagram at fitlabpgh and like us on Facebook. If you enjoy our podcasts, please tell your friends about us and consider leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts. Make FitLab PGH a go-to place to learn more about movement in the Pittsburgh area. Until next time, keep on moving.